Well, welcome to episode one of UC Analytics Unleashed. My name is Kevin Keeler. I'm the co-founder of Enable UC. I spend my time helping larger and complex organizations figure out their strategy in the wonderful world of unified communications and collaboration. And one of the things that I'm super excited about is analytics, because whatever strategy you pick, analytics is really the compass and the ruler that keeps you heading in the right direction and measuring if you're moving as quickly as you would like. And I am joined today by Christopher Martini from Voss Solutions. And I know, Christopher, both Voss Solutions and yourself are also fans of analytics. So why don't you introduce yourself to our viewers?
Yeah, thank you very much, Kevin. I'm Christopher Martini. I'm a vice president with Voss Solutions. I've been in the space for almost 25 years now. And about half of that time I spent at Microsoft, and a little more than half of that time I spent at Microsoft Partners. But certainly analytics has been a common thread, right? If I look through my career, even prior to that time, we may have called it something different, but we were always looking for what are the data points that are going to drive the business forward, for sure.
Yeah, no, that's a great place to start. And the genesis of this was really to we've sketched out 4 episodes. In this first episode, we're kind of going to talk about from humble beginnings, just kind of the starting of analytics.
Yeah, of
but
course.
I think we're excited to really focus on how analytics can drive some business outcomes. But to start us off, then, Christopher. When was the first time that you remember being involved in a discussion about analytics as it related to unified communications?
Yeah, I agree that the goal and the hope, right, is to shed light on where the future is going. But I think it's important in that context to consider, where did we come from, right? When did we start talking about this, and what were the conversations that were really guiding UC Analytics at the time? And if you go back, for me, I'm a Microsoft guy. I come from a Microsoft background, as I mentioned. So for me, it was really probably late 2010, early 2011 with the announcement, right, when OCS became Lync 2010. And all of a sudden you had enterprises who were at least having the discussion, and certainly salespeople who were from a Microsoft background were starting to talk to customers. And the initial questions were all around service reliability, right, and uptime. It wasn't an online, it wasn't a cloud solution, it was an on-prem solution. And there were concerns because it was the transition from that legacy PBX model. So there was concern about, is this product ready for prime time? If you go back, and it's hard to imagine life before COVID, right? But life before COVID, that uptime of the service was the main question, right? People wanted to be able to say, if there was an outage, where did the outage come from? But it was mostly whole service outage related, right? People weren't imagining or talking about drilling into an individual call so much. It was overall, is Lync currently up or down? And how can you help us know if an issue comes up, where did that issue come from? So it was really basic, like the very basics.
Yeah, and that's my experience as well, is that you really started with, if there's a pyramid, the bottom tier is reliability, right? So it's
for sure.
And there was things like keeping quorum with the servers. And so it was just really the discussion around, prove to me initially that something running on Windows, as opposed to like a purpose-built appliance, like, can you even keep it, can you keep it running for a good percentage of the time? And can you prove to me that it was running for a good percentage?
Yeah, and I would say that headache, right, was a headache that I had already lived 3 or 4 times previously, right? If you've been in this space for a long time, I was in an IT department when Windows Server became a thing. And I can remember the discussion, right? Are we going, these are mission critical workloads, and are we ever going to put them on a Windows box? And we know how that played out. I lived the same reality with Microsoft Exchange, right? Believe it or not, at the time, the global enterprise that I was working for was on deck all-in-one email. and the discussion just about can we move to Exchange, there were a lot of the same concerns, right? That email is the lifeblood of the organization, and can we really trust a Windows box to carry that workload? When we got into Lync, it was like, I mean, these are the phones, right? These are the phones.
Right.
Are we really going to have them handle that? So I understand the trepidation at the time, and I had more than one CIO tell me, you know, over my dead body, whatever, we don't want to talk about that. And then it was like 18 months, 24 months later, you started to have the telephone call go in the other direction, right? Somebody would call and say, hey, remember that thing I told you we were never going to do? We're doing it, and we need to see the data, right? We're already going down the path, but we need to have the data to justify that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and it's like a walk down memory lane. I had one CIO when the strategy for their organization, where we looked at the viable options, and it turned out that Lync really was probably, the best path forward for them, and that was the recommendation that we put forth. A CIO said to me, "Will you bet your career on this recommendation?" And I said yes, and then it turned out that was a good bet. But so reliability, kind of at a starting point. And then for me, at least, the analytics shifted to quality, because now that the server was up, there was a lot of discussion around, okay, now what's the quality? And at the time, people didn't understand QoS, and the network people really didn't understand, depending on the organization, this whole voice over IP, and the network tools would take samples every 5 minutes and say the network's up, and they'd say, what's your problem? And calls could go down between the 5-minute segments, and the typical tools didn't figure that out. So and there was a big shift to people understanding what MOS scores, mean opinion scores were, and did it actually relate? And so I saw quality as kind of the next step up in terms of what people were focusing on.
That was the great finger pointing era of UC, right? When you look back at that time, suddenly phone system had moved into IT in a way that it had never done before, right? Previously, you had, generally speaking, guys and girls that were on the phone team had been there for a while, right? They had been doing PBX for a while. And you might have shared closet space with them. You may have shared rack space with them. You may have shared data center space with them. But that was the end of the relationship. You weren't consulting each other on bandwidth, right? Network utilization. There weren't optimization discussions that were going on with those folks most often. Maybe if you were doing some kind of interesting voicemail solution that was getting backed up someplace. But generally speaking, that was it. And all of a sudden, those worlds collided. And, at the time, there really was, you were trying to defend your own area, right? Like that wasn't the server's fault. That wasn't a Lync issue. That was a network issue. The network team felt the same way, right? That was not a network issue. We were delivering plenty of bandwidth, and the service died during the call or the meeting or whatever it was. So trying to get to that resolution piece was important, and people were very defensive, right? There was a new technology that had kind of crept into the data center, and what are we going to do with it?
Yeah, and certainly, we're not saying that as kind of the focus of analytics has evolved, that reliability and quality aren't important. They are today too, just when there's problems. It's just that, I think both the skill set and the products have evolved. So then, and this is still a focus today, kind of as I'll say, move up the stack. I mean, there was initially a big focus on usage, partly because people were using it for billing, when you had an audio conferencing bridge in minutes, and, and still some calling plans are minute-based. But there was then usage, and then there was adoption. So as opposed to just minutes and number of calls, it's like who was using it. And I think in episode 2, we're really going to drill down into that, because adoption really has a big impact on licensing and licensing
for sure.
costs, right? So
that's
really the focus of next week's episode. But so we have, kind of usage, adoption, and then there was user satisfaction, because at some point, Teams still does this today. It pops up and says, hey, how was that call? How was that meeting on a star rating? And, that became something that was more sentiment analysis as opposed to a MOS score. And certainly when I've looked at the correlation, sometimes you could get 5 stars. So the end user thought it was a great call or a great meeting. And, the MOS score, which is an interesting calculation, would be lower than you'd expect, or vice versa, right? The MOS score said everything's great. The user gives you 1 star. So did you see then kind of the focus, move to that usage adoption and user satisfaction?
Yeah, and at the time, I can remember having conversations where we were trying to separate a true opinion of the performance of the product compared to a user, pardon me, being compelled to use the product. Right? There was a difference there. There was, how is the product performing? How does the employee feel about having to make phone calls in a completely different way? And that was when you really dug into some of the negative kind of reviews we were getting early on when we were trying to drive usage and adoption. It was, you used to have a phone that was simple and easy to use. And in some cases, when you made the jump to an application and a soft phone, people felt like, oh, I don't know how to make a phone call quickly. I don't know how to forward this to the person that I used to forward these calls to. And if the company didn't plan for those things and drive that knowledge into the organization, you really hit a road bump there. And I certainly was involved. I would love to tell you that I wasn't involved in deployments that experienced that, but I most certainly was, right? Where we got so focused on the technological, like the delivery of the service, that we lost sight of the importance of driving education, awareness, adoption to the users. And analytics played a key role in identifying those gaps, right? Where did we make the mistake? It was humbling, right, at that time to you might have gone through a year of justification and discussion and architectural reviews of these designs and deployments, and to get into the weeds and feel like the service is up, no one's using it. Right? There were times where nobody, I think you said this the other day when we were chatting, no one wants to own the most reliable service that no one in the organization uses. And I think there was a period of time where we were there. Luckily, that's all changed now, right? And I feel like if all you're looking at are call quality elements, you're leaving a lot of the value of that UC data on the table. And I think that's really where the future will be.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue, because all of this is really to focus on driving positive business outcomes, right? And so when it was user satisfaction, worked with a hundreds of thousands person global company, and yes, those users that repeatedly gave 1 or 2 stars, we sent people to talk to each and every one of them. And sometimes it was a technical issue, and sometimes it was just a vote that they were unhappy that you took away their desk phone, right? And either way, you drove the right business outcomes by having those discussions, but it was the analytics, back to my compass and ruler analogy, that really let you focus on that. And today, I think, coming out of the pandemic where everybody was forced to adopt some form of remote working, and a lot of it was UCaaS solutions exploded, whether that's Teams or WebEx or Zoom or RingCentral or any of the other ones. But analytics today is really, can help you optimize cost, right? Because if we rush to, make sure everybody could work wherever they were, that wasn't necessarily the most strategic and well planned out, whatever that was, March of 2020. So, I know these tools have these built-in analytics, and yet, Voss Solutions, who I should thank for sponsoring this series, because I think that this is an important discussion. So there are the Teams Admin Center and the the Cisco Control Hub. And so why is it then that, Voss and Voss Insights, what do those tools help me do, and kind of why did Voss build these tools?
Yeah, so I think it's important for people to recognize that analytics on its own is useless, right? Analytics on its own is useless. The value comes when it's effective data analysis, right? So
Right.
the analytics piece is effective data analysis, and then you need to combine that with great storytelling, right? No matter what it is you're trying to do with your data point, if you don't understand the story that that data point can help you tell, then it's kind of useless to have the data point, right? And call quality analytics, if you look at, the call quality dashboard and things from Microsoft, those are all very important things, and certainly our analytics solution is going to deliver those things to you. But to us, that's the beginning of the great storytelling part, right? Understanding how you marry that data to other data sources within the organization. That's where the magic of analytics happens, because it completely pivots the great stories that you're able to tell. No one wants to hear your uptime story in 2023, right? Everyone assumes, hey, we've got good solid uptime. And the thing that COVID taught us was that we will find a way, right? That was the big learning, one of probably a million on the list, but one of them was, we will find a way. If you can't make the call, we will find a way. If you're out for 2 weeks because you've got COVID, we will find a way. And the expectation of a user in a post-COVID world is that we will find a way. Call quality is obviously still important, but it's not as important as it was previously. The thing that we need to start to do, and the thing that I hope that we can uncover, right, as part of this series, is what are the great stories that you can tell when you use a tool that's not just focused on call quality, right? Like our goal at Voss is not to deliver a better call quality dashboard than Microsoft delivers, right? If all you need and all you want and all you're thinking about is call quality, there's a great solution from Microsoft to deliver that to you. If you want to take that call quality dashboard data, combine it with UC data, combine that with sales data from 2 different systems, combine that with building management system data from your building management system, card swipes, comings and goings, utilization of real estate, all of that. Those are incredibly powerful stories, and it allows IT to go outside of the IT department and tell those unique stories to the other rooms of the house, right? You can walk into the CFO and you can have a compelling story, like a real business driver story, right? Cost analytics, if we look at the dollars associated with a call quality dashboard, they're generally soft dollar disruption dollars, right? It took longer to get this thing done. We're not seeing as much of this. We want more of that. It's very different than saying, we've reviewed the data and we're spending too much money on this thing, and we just need to make a change and we need to reclaim that money. Or we're seeing enhanced productivity out of people that are doing the following things. We need to try to take that and cross-pollinate that across the rest of the organization, and we should see additional gains. All of those things, I think that's where the great storytelling of a more than call quality analytics tool is going to serve, especially an enterprise customer, very well.
Yeah, and you touched on a really important point there, Christopher. Is I think that most of the larger enterprises that I have an opportunity to work with, they're not just using one system, either because they're transitioning, right? So they have multiple systems, or quite frankly, their end state is multiple systems. There is, they might have said, well, the majority of our people are going to use Teams, but there's reasons in certain departments to use Zoom or to use Cisco WebEx or
they have a contract, right?
They
have a contract that they signed that still has 2 years left on it, and they're coming to us and saying, how do we tell a seamless story, right? That's another great use case for us. Is we have a multi-vendor complex landscape, and if you look at any organization of a certain size, they're all complex in some way. but they're not all complex in a way that makes them a good target for us to talk to, right? For us, we're really looking at the type of complexity where you're trying to draw those disparate systems together, or you're really looking to extend the value story outside of call quality, right? Does your organization see benefit in tying those data points together, right? Marrying that data and telling that story. And that's where I think Voss really excels.
Yeah, and I think that's a great place, I think, to kind of leave this first, kind of look at where things started and where they've come. If we've put up a URL there, vosssolutions.com. That's kind of your website if people want information on the products. I guess if people had a specific question for you, Christopher, they could find Christopher Martini on LinkedIn and
LinkedIn, absolutely.
Reach out to you. I know you're happy to chat. So there's the URL there, and as we said, let's just see if this is the right one. Yeah. So next week we're going to really drill down on how you can optimize your license, understand your licensing, and optimize that, because certainly organizations that we've talked about and dealt with may not be appropriately licensed. So they're either spending too much money or they're missing opportunities, as you said earlier, to maybe add licenses and optimize some business outcomes and drive some productivity.
Yeah,
so,
let's have a real dollar discussion, right?
Right.
How do we identify these pockets of value for an organization? How does analytics help us do that? And then how do you go and tell that story to the rest of the organization so you get buy-in and you can actually capture the gain, right? It's one thing to identify it, but then it generally requires some action. I can't wait to talk about it. I will fire up another coffee, Kevin, and I look forward to next week chatting with you.
Well, thank you very much. And if you are watching this live, that's great. If you're watching it as a recording, please still feel free to put in comments. Christopher and I will make sure that we look and answer any of those. And then certainly we would welcome you joining us next Thursday if you're in Pacific time, like Christopher, although actually next week I'm out in Anaheim at the Cisco WebEx1 kind of conference. So along with you, I will be joining at the 8 a.m. time. If you're in Eastern time, like today where I am just outside Toronto, please join us next Thursday at 11 a.m. And if you're in London or anywhere around there, please join us next Thursday, October 26th at 4 p.m. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Christopher. And once again, thank you for Voss for sponsoring this exciting series on UC Analytics Unleashed.
Yeah, cheers, Kevin.